Hi, this video is going to walk through teaching the Be Good People curriculum, specifically the 4 through 5 grade band and the core edition, which is designed for Tier 1 or school-wide instruction. And we're looking at the main Be Good People webpage right now. And the reason why I'm doing that is I wanted to start by explaining the 3 ingredients, we call them, of the Be Good People curriculum. And the first one here on the left is lessons. So that's the most rigorous and structured element of the curriculum. We're teaching discrete, definable skills and teaching them step by step and then applying them to scenarios. So that's what you might call like the backbone when you're looking at your scope and sequence. When we're looking at like a skill of the week, for example, many grade levels will teach like a skill of the week on Monday or Tuesday or both. And that's kind of what drives their instruction for the whole week, is that skill of the week, which is a lesson. Extension activities is a flexible category that we use. That term, extension activities, we use for read aloud books, videos from YouTube, discussion questions, worksheets. So it's very flexible. We just use it for extra materials that can kind of be added on to that lesson to enrich it, make it more engaging. So it's very common for, like I said, a grade level team to be teaching a lesson on Monday or Tuesday to start their week. But then on subsequent days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is very common. There's extension activities that during our morning meeting, for example, we're watching, one of those YouTube videos or doing a read aloud and discussing it together. And then community building, while extension activities and lessons, while these are content focused and framed around specific SEL benchmarks for the grade levels we're teaching, community building is just would you rather questions, icebreaker questions, games, and the purpose here is just to get to know each other. So now that I've explained those kind of 3 pieces, and we're going to go through all of them in this video, I'm going to jump to click this 4 through 5 green button to get to the 4 through 5 core edition. And this page is laying out all the content, but on a day-to-day basis, hopefully your school has used one of our example schedules, and you have, for example, like a spreadsheet where, week to week, we have our weekly schedule defined for us so that we're all keeping across classrooms, across a grade level, on the same pace of topics throughout the school year. But I'm going to just pick a random lesson. So let's say be patient. So talking about a couple of things as we're looking at this opening slide. One is you'll notice, it's called Be Patient. And in the bottom left corner, it says skill Be Patient, a little bit subtle down there. That's what we call like a skill label. And from K all the way up through 12, for these lessons, we'll have the same skill label. So obviously the skill gets more sophisticated and complicated, and we teach it in different ways, and we have different examples as far as applying the skill. But we want that consistent label, because call a spade is what I like to say. Like if a kindergartner is ignoring distractions, if a 12th grader is ignoring distractions, we're still doing the same thing. But the big prominent thing students are going to see is going to be a more accessible, understandable phrase. So in this case, sometimes it's hard to be patient. So, not in this case a huge difference between the skill label down here and this, lesson label up here for kids. But when we get to certain skills like responding to conflict or setting appropriate boundaries, like those are hard phrases for younger kids to wrap their heads around. So it's, always going to be this big, prominent, accessible phrase. So I would start, I just pulled up this Google slide on my smartboard, and I would start by saying, like, sometimes it's hard to be patient. That's what we're learning about today, guys. And then I would take this little paragraph here where it defines and explains a little bit more of the topic, and likely just read that and expand on it a little bit if I'm comfortable and if I want to. On the bottom right here, this is what we call a learning badge. So there's 5 main SEL competencies. Those are the same 5 areas that our SEL standards in Minnesota are written around. One of them is self-management. So you see down here a benchmark code for the 4 through 5 grade band for self-management. The only thing is we thought self-management is a pretty, it's not really designed for student understanding. It's more for adults. It's a standard phrase. So when we made this learning badge, we just put managing yourself. And we did that for the other 5 standards areas. So instead of self-awareness, it's knowing yourself. Instead of responsible decision-making, it's making good choices. So it just makes that phrase a little bit easier for 4th and 5th graders to wrap their head around. And it provides some nice continuity because you'll see on every lesson one of these learning badges. And when we get into the extension activities, community building, you'll see those learning badges. So they're a nice feature that pulls the curriculum together and gives that sense of continuity. And then in the bottom right, it says lesson here, and then core edition. So that's just not a huge deal, but it just tells you what you're looking at. So, if you're opening up Google slide decks from your building schedule, it just helps you know, oh, am I looking at a lesson, an extension activity, community building? It's always going to be down there in the bottom right corner. And then finally, there's the speaker notes down here. So the first link is going to let you share feedback with us, and we really appreciate it. Be Good People has grown so much based entirely on teacher feedback. So we really value it. This link will take you back to the website we were just looking at, so you can quickly get back there and look for more materials. And then hear what's new. We always recommend that the instructional leaders, maybe PLC leaders, grade level team leaders, subscribe to our mailing list because we make changes to the curriculum based on teacher input. And we want people to know about them so that it doesn't catch them by surprise. So we always recommend that folks sign up for that mailing list. And before I move on, I just wanted to mention, I'm looking at this slideshow in not presentation mode. And if I was presenting this and teaching this to students, I would click that slideshow button and get into full-on present mode. Because, for example, it's not all the time, but there's going to be animations in some of these slides, where something appears after I do a click. And that just doesn't work unless you're in presentation mode. So we always recommend the teachers go into presentation mode when they're teaching students. So with that said, let's look at slide number 2. Not all the lessons have a attention getter here, but it is a relatively common feature. So on a good deal of the lessons, you're going to see either a quote or a video, and it always has a discussion prompt. So like one short discussion prompt, so you're not just showing it to students or throwing a quote at them. You're pausing a little bit for some discussion, but again, it's an attention getter. So it's related to the subject of the lesson, to the skill, and it's just getting students talking. So I would play that and then say, what did you notice or wonder about the quote he shared? So it's just, a very general question that's very open-ended. Let students come at it from any direction they want. And then this is what we call like a why slide or a rationale slide. So teachers wanted these very early in the lesson, kind of explaining, getting students to reflect on why is this important for me to be learning about. So I might, the question at the top, it's not a question in this case, why being patient is important. I would probably ask the students, why do you think being patient is important? What could it do for somebody? What would happen if we weren't patient? And then search for any ideas they have. And if they're pretty quiet, and if you're hearing just those little chirps from the crickets, you do have some prompts there that you could read, and that could stir discussion. So it says, you will get what you're waiting for faster if you show patience. And you could just say, like, what do you guys think of that? And you could, for example, if you think of a situation in your own life where you've had a positive outcome because you showed patience, it would be a great time to throw that into the lesson, because students, of course, really relate to your personal anecdotes, and it's a great opportunity to build trust and relationships. On the right side of the slide is these values icons. So we're going to put 4 on every lesson. And we wanted these to be here because we had teachers asking, can we just integrate values into these lessons every week so that we're always having discussions about values and helping students learn values vocabulary and reflect all the time about what their personal values are. So you could negotiate these symbols, use them, leverage them in any manner that you really want to, but a really common way would just say, like, what do you think being patient has to do with respect? Or what do you think being patient helps us be respectful? Why do you think that? Or what do you think being patient has to do with cooperation? So you get the idea. It's just an opportunity to kind of like link that skill to the values. And then once we've gotten past our why or a rationale, we look at prior knowledge. So I would ask the students, pretend you're giving advice to a friend about how to be patient. Like, what does it look like? What does it sound like? How do you do it? What's going on in your brain when you're being patient? You notice how I'm just adding on to the slide. Again, these are not perfectly scripted. We don't want to box people in like that. There's just enough there to, if worst comes to worst, no prep time at all, I can just pull up the slide and read this. That'll be okay. But as much as I can kind of add on to it then and keep talking, the better. But anyway, I would prompt students to pretend they're giving some advice to a friend about how to be patient, and then just ask, what would you tell them to do or not to do? And this is a very typical way that this slide looks and reads. Again, we're just trying to get at prior knowledge and what the kids already know about the topic. The next slide is like a preview slide. So we had many teacher requests for, before we get into these specific skill step slides, so it goes step by step and digs in. Teachers wanted kind of an overarching presentation of the skill in its entirety. So we have 1, 2, 3 in this case. There's different amounts of skill steps. They range from like 2 to 5 for this grade band, 2 to 5 skill steps. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I'd say, like, what are the steps? How do we be patient? And again, this is kind of like, we just talked about prior knowledge. Now I'm giving them kind of a recipe to reflect on. And the point here is not to get sucked into talking about the whole skill right on this slide. I would just read them or have students volunteer to read them for me. But we don't want to dive deep into these, because again, that's the next thing that we're going to do. So if you're seeing this on your smartboard, just know, the goal here, and again, you're going to see this every week if you're a 4th or 5th grade teacher, the goal here is just to present the whole deal and then dig into it piece by piece, component by component. So with that said, here's step 1. I would read at the top, think about what you want. That's step 1. And again, like I said before, it's not a really meaty script for you to read on a piece of paper in front of you that you're holding as you're walking around the room. It's not a script. It's just a little bit of text that you can read off the slide to get you started. And then it's really great to expand on that as much as you're comfortable. And we try and bold discussion questions like you see there. What are some other examples? We try to bold those so that they stand out a little bit. And you're seeing like a static still photo on this slide. For some of them, we have cute little GIFs or GIFs. Can never remember what they're called. But we had a lot of teacher feedback over the years requesting, bright, colorful, engaging images. So those are featured on the slides. So you see, we just go through step by step, and we're just trying to build understanding of a recipe for the skill, what it looks like, why each of these pieces are important. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve here. It's kind of like when you're teaching any element of math, we're teaching the how to approach it, and then we apply it, and that's the next step. So now that we have this kind of formula for this skill, we want to apply it to different situations. So you're going to have 5 situation cards, and that little progress, those dots on the bottom, just help me as the teacher track which one I'm on, so that I know how much, for pacing purposes, how much of this lesson is left. And I would just read this one. And then the point here is kind of like an I do, we do, you do. And for this first one especially, like I want it to be an I do. So let's look at this scenario. Your teacher kept not calling on you even though you had your hand up and you knew the answers to the question that the teacher was asking. So I really love that this is in this lesson, because one of my favorite things to do when teaching Be Good People was if I have a student volunteer, which in this case, I want it to be an I do, so I'm going to model. So I want to be the person in the situation who is having to be patient, to use the skill. So I would say, hey, can someone come up here and help me out with this? And I'd have a student volunteer, and I would want them to be the teacher. And where I was going with that is my favorite thing was when students would be a teacher in a scenario, because they always showed me their absolute best teacher imitation, and it was just never not funny. So I would have the student sitting next to me pretending to be the teacher. I would keep raising my hand really urgently. They would look past me and call on other students. And then I would, in this case, model. And by model, I mean I'd be doing a little bit of narration, because the first step is think about what you want. So I'd have to narrate that, right? I can't act that out. So I'd say like, oh, I really want him to call on me, but he's not. What am I supposed to do about that? And I might ask the class for input or advice, and they might say, well, like it's okay, be patient. But you get the idea. Some of these skills are more covert. It's like ignoring distractions. It's really hard for people to see that it's happening in your brain, so you have to narrate a little bit more. Whereas something like resolving conflicts or being an active listener or having a conversation, there's some skills that are really social and interactive, so I don't have to do as much narration to model them, if that makes sense. So, and I want to do a good job. I don't want to do a bad job. I want to be a really good model, by the way, when I'm acting out the skill. And then, there's 5 of these. For the second one, I would probably do the same thing. I would probably ask for another student volunteer, and I would again be the model. So you really want a new toy that costs more money than what you have now. Your parents tell you. So in this case, I'd have the student be the parents. And that's also really amusing just to see them do their really good kind of like stern parent imitation, 4th graders or 5th graders doing that. And I would be the child being patient. And then I would get to, these final 3, I really like to hand it off to the students. And you could do it one of really 2 ways. You could have the students volunteer. So instead of me being part of it, I'd have 2 or 3 students volunteer. They'd come up to the front of the room and they would act it out together. And then we'd give them feedback if we wanted to. But they would just do it. We'd all be observers. Or it depends on the maturity level of your class, all sorts of things, pacing, but you could have students partner up or form groups of 3, and then you say go, and everybody, you're gonna have multiple groups acting it out, and then you say come back together, you get everybody's attention back in, and then you have 1 or 2 groups share about what they did, what they learned, what they noticed about how their partners or group mates were demonstrating. So you get the idea. It just depends on you're going to know your class best what works as far as their practice, but you're just facilitating practice. And then ideally, if you have time, some reflection, because you want to share things they noticed, things that they thought were really positive, kind of like feedback rituals, So you go through those, and if you're really pressed for time, and like I said, at elementary, if this is happening during a morning meeting, you might have to stretch this out across 2 days, for example. Just depends on your master schedule. But if you do, you could click this. Say that you just ran out of time. Say that it's Tuesday, or it was a short week, whatever. For whatever reason, we just couldn't finish the lesson. That's okay. That's part of the reason why we have 5 slides here. It's kind of like 5 math problems, and ideally we go through them all, but we really want to look for just proficiency. And if we just didn't finish them all, we just click skip to end. That button is there for a reason, just to send a signal to the teacher that it's okay if we didn't finish it. We're not doing a bad job. We just ran out of time, so we just click skip to end, and that'll take us here. So the last slide says lesson complete, and you notice it has that learning badge from the front of the lesson. We kind of circle around to that, because we're summarizing what we learned about. So managing yourself, again, that continuity. You're going to see these 5 learning badges across all your lessons and activities, which is that nice continuity piece. And then the values graphics. So I could just read these off. Hey, we learned about respect, patience, friendship, cooperation, and managing ourselves. I could just read that off orally. One thing you could do with it, and 4th and 5th graders are going to have varying degrees of buy-in to this, but we have this little learning log. So this helps students track throughout the school year every topic that they learned about in their lessons, their extension activities, their community building, so they can write their name there, draw their picture, and you'll see these same learning badges. So I may have students take these out of their desks and color in one of these coins, because we learned about managing ourselves. And then for each of the 4 values, they can also color in a coin. And it explains it here on the website, but just really briefly, these aren't designed to really supplant, like if you have a school-wide ticket system or incentive system, these aren't designed to function like that. These are more, I mean, they're completely optional. I think it's very good to have it be optional teacher to teacher, and let them use it or not use it how they will. But a really common scenario is a teacher might say like, oh, for every 10 coins that we color in, we'll do a Go Noodle dance party. So it's just attaching a little bit of ritual and a little bit of juice to this, routine of coloring in the coins, just so it kind of has a consequence, a positive consequence. And that is a lesson. So the last couple things I'm going to do is just look at extension activities and community building. So if you follow one of our example schedules, for every lesson that you teach, like being patient, there's going to be a button or a column next to it and a link that says extension activities. And if I'm teaching Be Patient on Monday or Tuesday, for the rest of the week, I might get pointed to a page that looks like this, which is quote unquote extension activities. And like I said, this is a pretty loose term that we use just to capture extra enrichment material. So we have these graphics on here to kind of show you what kind of format we're talking about. So this is a video with some discussion questions. These are just discussion questions, worksheets. These are books that we have to purchase unless we have them in the school library. For some, there's read aloud, so it would look like this, but there's a little play button. We just, quickly showing you kind of what the content is before you click on it. These headings are the SEL benchmarks, so it just is a nice opportunity to learn about the benchmarks as you're doing your normal workflow. And then these take it furthers. These are ideas for academic integration. So, these extension activities are still really, they fit in the school day during morning meetings or Class Connect during like our dedicated explicit SEL instruction time where we pause academics and point our attention solely at SEL. So they're for that purpose. But during math and reading and science, every other time of the day, we have opportunities to build those SEL skills. So we have these ideas, and it's a growing bank of how you can optimize math or reading, any instructional activity you're doing to boost SEL skills. So we just thought as long as people are visiting these pages, it's a great time to pick up those tips and tricks. And I'll just open one of these just to show. So like here is a fairly typical, you see there's the learning badge there, there's the benchmark that it's supporting, so you have that. What we have here for these videos, it's nice. We tell like how long it is and then how many chunks it's broken into, because generally speaking, we're gonna chunk these videos so that students have a little bit of clip and then some discussion questions. So that's just, and then like I said, the learning badge is always at the end so we can reflect back. So that's one example. Like I said, there's worksheets, there's all kinds of different things. Like let's click on calming strategies, coloring sheets. These are cool. So, the learning badge is still there. Everything looks pretty much the same, except there's no video. It's just worksheets. And if I want to print these, in this case, there's a little print button that opens it up for me. So like I said, very flexible category, these extension activities. And then finally, community building. So your SEL schedule as a grade level or building likely points to this page for community building activities. And these are, icebreakers, would you rathers, games. It's a growing bank. We're always looking to expand it, but it just puts these at your fingertips. So, during your morning meeting or Class Connect time, you can be pulling up these questions. There's generally 4. And you might not even get through all of them. A lot of teachers tell me that they like that there's, they don't get through all of them, but there's 4, so they can skip some that they aren't their favorites. So they, if the class isn't liking one of the questions, we just skip it and go on to the next one. But 4 has just come up as like a good number, generally speaking. And then the last slide of this, again, you're going to see those learning badges. We put those everywhere. And in this case, thinking of others, that's a stand-in for social awareness is the label for the actual standard, the social awareness. And then getting along with others is that stand-in for relationship skills. We're just coming back to we're practicing those SEL skills of social awareness and relationship skills just by doing a community building activity. And that about wraps it up. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope that your class enjoys using Be Good People's Core Edition, and have a wonderful day. Thank you for your time.